time later if we want to. Perfect. All right. Well, welcome, Joanna. And now, Jasmine, can you please take roll call?
Yes, thank you. And before we do roll call, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. Just as a reminder, due to the COVID-19 health emergency and to protect Free City College, Oversight Committee members, city employees, and the public, city offices are closed. However, members and employees will be participating in the meeting remotely. This precaution is taken pursuant to the various local, state, and federal orders, declarations, and directives. Committee members and employees will attend the meeting through video conference and participate in the meeting to the same exact extent as if they were physically present. For all members and employees participating in this Zoom meeting, we ask that you mute yourselves when you are not speaking. This will help reduce background noise. When you would like to speak, please select raise hand and wait to be introduced. Please remember to unmute yourselves before you speak. Public comment will be available for each item on this agenda. Each speaker will be allowed 2 minutes to speak. Comments or opportunities to speak during the public comment period are available via Zoom and by phone. For Zoom users, from your screen, select raise hand and wait to be introduced. For phone users who called in, press *9 to raise your hand on the phone and wait to be introduced. You will be added to the queue to speak. Please wait until it is your turn to speak. When it is time for you to speak, you will be brought into the conversation by the Zoom administrator. Please state your name, and of course, you have the right to remain anonymous if you choose. You will have the standard 2 minutes to provide your comments. For Zoom users, there will be a timer on the screen. For phone users, we will give you a prompt that sounds, and you will have 30 seconds remaining. While you are waiting, you will be able to watch and listen to the meeting. From the phone, the system will notify you when you are in line and waiting. All callers will remain on mute until their line is open. All speakers, please account for the time delays and speaking discrepancies between live coverage and streaming. Best practices are to call from a quiet location, speak clearly and slowly, and turn down any television or radio background noise. This meeting will be recorded and posted on DCYF's website. The first item on the agenda is the call to order and roll call. Members, please unmute yourselves. Co-chair Eileen Mariano.
Here.
Co-chair Bridget Davia.
Present.
Nikki Hatfield. Wen Mai Kai. Angelica Campos.
Present.
Supervisor Gordon Moore.
Present.
Joanna Fight.
Present.
Calvin Kwok.
Present.
Maria Sue.
Present.
Lisa Cooper Wilkins.
Present.
Alyssa Messer.
Here.
Christopher Brody.
Present.
And Tyler Wu is absent. Connie Ford.
Here.
Melanali Villalobos. Here, Mariano, we have quorum.
Great. Thank you. So I think we can move on to the second item on our agenda. The second is adoption of the agenda. So please take a moment to review the agenda on the screen. Are there any committee member questions on this item? Okay, and are there any public comments?
Anthony, are there any speakers in the queue?
There are no speakers in the queue.
Okay, oh, sorry, I didn't remember Messer. Sorry about that. I don't know if I saw your hand.
I only just put it up. I just wanted to thank DCYF and for really making sure that we're back on track with consistent meetings and pulling this together sooner than we might have expected. So that means a lot, and I think it's great.
Is there motion for approval of the agenda?
So moved.
And second?
Second,
Great. DCYF, can you please take a roll call vote?
Okay. We will now vote for the approval of the adoption of the agenda. Co-chair Eileen Mariano,
Yes.
co-chair Bridget Davia,
Yes.
Nikki Hatfield, Gwen Mon Kai, Angelica Campos,
Yes.
And yes, this is Widmon.
thank you, and Supervisor Gordon Marr,
Yes.
Joanna Fight,
Yes.
Calvin Quat,
Yes.
Maria Sue,
Yes.
Lisa Cooper Wilkins,
Yes.
Alyssa Messer,
yes.
Christopher Brody,
Yes.
and Tyler, who is absent, Connie Ford,
Yes.
Melanali Villalobos. Motion passes.
Great. We can move on to item number 3 in the agenda, which is general public comment. DCYF, can you see if there are any public comments?
Okay. Members of the public may address the Free City College Oversight Committee on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Oversight Committee. With respect to agenda items, members of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes at the time such item is called. Is there any public comment for this item not listed on the agenda? If there is, from your screen, please select raise hand, or from your phone, press *9. Please wait to be introduced for your turn to speak. When it's time for you to speak, you will be brought into the conversation by the Zoom administrator. Please state your name, and of course, you have the right to remain anonymous if you choose. You will have the standard 2 minutes to provide your comment. Are there any speakers in the queue?
No speakers in the queue.
Seeing none, public comment is closed.
Great. That moves us to item 4 on our agenda, which is, item 4 or item 5? I think it's item 4. Yep, item 4, which is the resolution to allow teleconference meetings under California Government Code Section 54953E. Under the mayor's July 31st, 2020 order, policy bodies may meet remotely without advance approval from the mayor or the board of supervisors. But beginning on October 1st, 2021, policy bodies must regularly adopt findings to continue holding remote meetings. Under normal circumstances, the Brown Act imposes social requirements for remote teleconference meetings, including requirements to provide special notice to the public and to allow members of the public to attend each teleconference location and observe each policy body member at the location calling into the meeting. AB 361 suspends those requirements if the governor has proclaimed a state of emergency, provided that the policy body makes certain findings. Specifically, to invoke AB 361's provisions, so long as the governor's emergency proclamation remains in effect, policy body must take 2 findings at least once every 30 days. 1, it has considered or reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency, and either 2A, the state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of the policy body members to meet safely in person, or 2B, state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. Are there any committee member questions on this item? Are there any public comments on this item?
Anthony, are there any speakers in the queue?
There are no speakers in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Given that, is there a motion for adoption of this resolution?
Moved.
Second.
Great. DCYF, can you please take the roll call vote?
Now take a vote to approve the adoption of the resolution. Co-chair Eileen Mariano,
Yes.
co-chair Bridget Davia,
Yes.
Nikki Hatfield, Gwen Mon Kai,
Yes.
Angelica Campos,
Yes.
Supervisor Gordon Moore,
Yes.
Joanna Fight,
Yes.
Calvin Kwok,
Yes.
Maria Sue,
Yes.
Lisa Cooper Wilkins,
Yes.
Alyssa Messer,
Yes.
Christopher Brody,
Yes.
Connie Ford,
Yes.
and Malinali Villalobos. Okay, motion passes.
Okay, on to item 5. The next item is approval of the minutes from our March 2022 meeting. Looks like those are up on the screen, so please go ahead and take a minute to review. Okay, and while we are reviewing, are there any member comments or questions about this item?
Chair or Co-Chair Mariano, I just wanted to say that I think the minutes are great and sort of echo Member Messer's comments earlier in thanks to DCYF and you for just getting more on top of this important oversight committee functioning at a better level now. So I really appreciate the minutes, that the fact that we're meeting, relatively soon after the March meeting. And I also noticed all the documents, from all the past meetings and everything is well organized on the website as well, the DCYF website. So thank you.
If there are no other member comments or questions, are there any public comments?
Anthony, are there any speakers in the queue?
There are no speakers in the queue.
Great. Do we have a motion for approval of the March 2022 minutes?
So moved.
A second?
Maria, second.
Great. DCYF, can you please take the roll call?
We will now take a vote to approve the adoption of the minutes. Co-Chair Eileen Mariano,
Yes.
Co-Chair Bridget Davia,
Yes.
Nikki Hatfield, Wayne Mankai,
Yes.
Angelica Campos,
Yes.
Supervisor Gordon Moore,
Yes.
Joanna Fight,
Second. Oh, yes.
Calvin Kwok,
Yes.
Maria Sue,
Yes.
Lisa Cooper Wilkins,
Yes.
Alyssa Messer,
Yes.
Christopher Brody,
Yes.
Connie Ford,
Yes.
and Malinali Villalobos. This motion passes.
Great. Our next agenda item is item 6, City College update led by Lisa Cooper Wilkins. She will then introduce the RP group, who will be sharing a brief overview of the project. The RP group will come back again in the summer and share greater details, including the outcomes of their project. So Lisa, to you.
Thank you. First, I need to request that the 2 members of the RP group get brought over, Priya Shaplo and Gio Sousa, please. They're in the audience right now.
Okay, got it.
And if possible, am I able to share my screen?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. As soon as I find my presentation. Hold on 1 second. Let me do something really quickly here. Pull up my presentation. Thank you. All right, so thank you for this opportunity to share a quick update since our last meeting. The first thing I'd just like to say is that we'll provide the Free City Program Participant Report and some of the enrollment metrics. We were also asked to share some financial aid data. So I have some really just basic information about number of FAFSAs completed and the types of aid that were awarded to students as a result of those FAFSA completions. And then I want to be able to turn it over to my colleagues from the RP group to do a short presentation. And then I think it depends on the will of the committee whether or not they will be questions about the program participant and enrollment data, or do you want to wait till the end for all the questions? So this is just an update since the last time we met. These were data that were sort of extracted just at the end of last month around enrollment in the Free City program. And so in total since the fall 2020 semester through just last summer, we've had a total of 18,482 student enrollment fee waivers processed, and another 9,254 free city grants awarded to students for a total of 27,736 sort of free city related impacts, compared to our overall city college total of 48,066 students. And I just wanted you all to be able to see the amounts, including any repayments that have happened for students who've had changes in their enrollment status. Also, this shares the details of the number of units that students may have dropped in the course of the year, and sort of units that total that were impacted based on enrollments. And so you can see that clearly there's more activity that happens in the fall and spring semesters versus our summer intersessions, which are considerably smaller. The next slide shares oops, I did skip over a little quickly. Again, different perspective on it. You can see the total number of students here what their average units are accumulated, the number of students who have dropped, very few students with 0 units earned, and then the number of students who would be considered full-time. I think that has been part of some of the discussion about whether or not having access to Free City impacts students' unit taking behavior, and if we will see an uptick in more units taken overall. And then the next slide is the information that was requested about, again, the total number of students enrolled in the 3 terms prior, and how many students actually applied for FAFSA, and if they were awarded. And this award data unfortunately doesn't tell us discreetly how many students got which specific types of aid, and I can bring back a much more detailed breakdown next time, whether or not they received just the California Community College Promise Grant, whether they also received, Cal Grant or Pell Grant. And so I can definitely bring that data back, but in the final totals, it's just those students were awarded something other than just taking advantage of free city funds. And this was the point where I wanted to be able to allow for my colleagues from the RP group to be able to provide a, I think at this point, just they've been hard at work kind of looking across the national landscape about what promise programs, sort of some of their sort of best and promising practices that other promise programs have been able to successfully utilize. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm happy to take the baton from you and share my screen. I'm hopeful that you are able to see this. Yes. Okay. So thank you, Lisa. Hello, everyone. My name is Priyadarshini Chaplot. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I go by Priya. I am joined by my dear friend and colleague, Gio Sosa, and we are working collectively to advance the learning from the recent annual report that was done in fall of 21 around the 19 and 20 year. And so, as Lisa mentioned, what Gio and I like to do today is just introduce a little bit of the work that we are doing to support the thinking and learning and considerations for evolving Free City to meet the aim and the dream that you all have about its impact on a variety of students at the college. So very briefly, the scope of our work is to try to address this question, which is what areas of opportunities exist for the Free City College program that can contribute to closing the college's equity gaps for students from disproportionately impacted groups. And so to that end, what we are already doing and what we'd like to continue doing over the next couple of months is to identify potential opportunities around program improvement, like program design considerations, as well as additional data that might be helpful in better understanding the impact of the program, and also offering input on ways to evaluate if and how well certain features of the program are working. And so the way that we are primarily doing that is twofold. One is by conducting additional analyses of the student data, and we are grateful for the partnership with Liz and with the Research and Planning Office at the college to try to identify differential impacts on the academic outcomes for students. And Gio is going to be talking a little bit about that in just a minute. And the other way we're doing it is to lift up what we are learning and seeing at the college itself. So evaluating previous or looking at evaluations in previous reports, looking at the college's equity plan and its equity priorities. And as Lisa mentioned, just doing a kind of a rough scan of similar programs in the country. And one thing that is important to note, and we can talk about it a little bit more, is that Free City is kind of unique in the volume of students that it's impacting. And so there are certain considerations for when we look at other programs, and I'll go into that in just a minute. But the purpose of today's is just to give you an appetizer of what will be forthcoming in hopefully I think our timeline is to be wrapping this up by the end of June, so stay tuned and there'll be more in the next meeting. So Gio, I'd love to invite you to speak a little bit about the reflections that you've been having thinking about the additional data that we've been looking at.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Priya. As Priya alluded to earlier, there are two core facets to this. And one of them, of course, has to do with actual review of the available evidence, mostly quantitative evidence that speaks to the potential impact that the program is or may be having on student outcomes, particularly those equity outcomes that Priya alluded to earlier. Let's go to the next slide. So before we even delve into the data that we do have access to, some questions that we can begin to explore and potentially address with this work. I think we thought it would be fruitful to revisit some of the findings from the recent annual report. And so this highlights, I think, an assortment of key points or key findings. Maybe two particular bright spots here are with respect to the growing proportion of students that are taking advantage of the program. You see upwards of 72% as of the 1920 year. And also I would look to actually the very last bullet here on this list in terms of the completions that have been observed over that period during which this program has been available. That's actually increased. The other bullet there too, that sub-bullet there, has to do with the equity groups, the priority equity groups, that they're completing at comparable rates, suggesting that at least on the basis of this particular outcome, no gaps have yet been observed, which both great bright spots, wonderful springboards, I think, for a lot of that work that we want to center on these equity efforts that Priya was describing. Some opportunity points also here as part of the key findings stemming from the annual report, namely with what appear to be minimal changes on the unit front and on the term-to-term retention front. Also with respect to, and this I guess brings us back to this equity question, with respect to the relative proportion of participants in terms of their ethnic background. We can see here, at least based upon the most recent data, that participants seem to be older, they're more likely to be white, and they're more likely to identify as Asian. So that might be an opportunity that we can revisit in doing this data, but also in doing the work that Priya will be sharing in the future, but certainly giving you a bit of an appetizer about in just a moment. Let's go to the next slide to talk about our data that we do have access to, and many thanks goes to Liz and the Office of Research and Planning for providing this information. These data points, in fact, are ones that I would say many, maybe all of you are quite familiar with, in fact, because I saw even in that enrollment metrics report, many and maybe all of these data points were to some extent highlighted in that document. So the data file that we have access to identifies those different groupings, I suppose. That is, those students that have never participated in Free City, those that have received a fee waiver, those that have received that grant. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because there could be differential outcomes associated with those identities, with those groupings. And that is something that we can certainly explore. Also noteworthy is that in this file that Liz has shared with us, we have data going back all the way to the summer of 2016 through spring 21. And so when you have a file as robust as we have, in the range of 300,000 records in all, there are a host of questions that you can answer, and I'll get to that in a bit. But certainly those three groupings are critical. Another facet to this, and you see this in that enrollment report, is the unit taking behavior. Attempted units, earned units, but also excused and canceled units. These are all different outcomes that we can explore. And I would say equally important, maybe more important, is that we have this information that we can disaggregate according to the demographic characteristics you see in this last bullet, by age, by ethnicity, and by gender. So if you don't mind, the next slide. The next slide here then highlights how we can leverage this information. One, of course, we can look at the demographics of participants, and we have some insight into that just from the prior year findings. But given that we have this longitudinal database to work with that spans a number of years back to 2016, we can explore how those demographics have changed over time. We can also examine that link between participation, that is, being in one of those three groups, not ever participating, receiving a grant, or receiving the waiver, and how that can or has affected that term-to-term enrollment or that term-to-term persistence. So in this way, we can have some insight into what impact that program is having in the likelihood of having students re-enroll in the college. Also, of course, we have, even among those that are participating, some receive the grant, others receive the fee waiver. We can explore what the unique relationship is between those two types or those two groupings in subsequent enrollment. Also, this I suppose goes without saying, given the earlier slide, the focus on unit attainment. That really is the core outcome that we're focused on, given the scope of the data that we have access to. So we will be looking, among other things, at the percentage of units that were actually earned. We not only have their attempted units, but we have their earned units. We can readily look at the percentage of those attempted units that were earned by those different groups that we're talking about. Now, some students participated in the program their entire enrollment career at the college. Some were, of course, part of the program one term, not in the other, and then came back a third term. So we can look at all those different iterations and how they're correlated or related to these different unit outcomes that we're talking about. And again, I would say maybe most important is we can look at all these different outcomes on the basis of those demographic characteristics that I alluded to earlier, age, ethnicity, gender. So we can begin to explore the potential equity gaps and potential opportunities here in this data file. We could potentially, given these findings, begin to merge some of the efforts that we could tie in with this program to the broader equity efforts that are being pursued at the college. Priya?
Thank you for that, Gio. What I'd like to supplement Gio's piece with is some of the other ways that we're thinking about gathering input that helps us make informed suggestions or recommendations to the committee. So to that end, I'd like to just revisit some of the recommendations that came from the recent annual report. Among them was a recommendation to articulate program metrics to monitor success, specifically looking at equity, which is part of the work that Gio and I are already working on. And the other is offering suggestions for programmatic improvement. These include thinking additionally about ways to engage students and student groups that we would like to have use Free City and benefit from Free City. Another one that's really critical is thinking about ways to bundle Free City in other types of financial supports for students. And so thinking more critically about the role and positioning of FAFSA completion and helping students think about ways to get comprehensively, for lack of a better word, packaged with financial supports to help them with their particular educational pathways. Thinking about ways to support students in enrolling full-time and what kind of value proposition that could look like. Encouraging, as I already mentioned, FAFSA completion, and also thinking about the incentive structure. So these are just some of the, these are some of the insights that had come from the previous annual report that we'd like to continue building on. And to that end, what Gio and I are already doing and also planning to do in the next few weeks is, one, better understand the student experience of someone who receives Free City. So what does, for example, what are the ways in which students interact with the college? We could even focus on onboarding as they connect to City College through the application, through other features of the onboarding as they begin their first semester and even extend into their second semester. The second is, as Gio mentioned, thinking about how the Free City work doesn't and shouldn't be done in a bubble as far as student success efforts at the institution. So spoiler alert, what other colleges that have similar types of programs, promise programs, free college programs do is think intentionally about ways to fold the free tuition, the free college in with other features of the student experience, whether it's helping students connect with an advisor or a counselor with intention, or supporting students and making kind of informed educational program choices. And so thinking about how to coordinate and, dare I say, integrate the free college opportunity with other features of their experience at the institution. And so to that end, the third bullet is really looking at similar programs. We're trying to focus on programs that are city-based so that they're a little bit similar to San Francisco's efforts. So we're looking at Kalamazoo Valley program, which has been going on for about 15 years. We're looking at the Columbus program that's actually very nascent, but they have some bold and ambitious ideas of centering the student experience in the way that the Promise program works. And then also looking at Seattle Promise, which is another city-based intention. As I mentioned earlier, one of the distinctions between Free City is just the volume of students that are receiving it. We're talking about over 10,000, 15,000 students versus programs that have, a few hundred students. And so thinking about the kind of ways to holistically support students in that experience. And so I just want to end by offering some thought points and considerations for the kinds of features that we've been seeing in other programs. A lot of the features that we see are around weaving the tuition assistance and tuition relief in connecting students to other experiences that are high impact practices, evidence-based practices that can ensure that students enter into strong pathways of study, progress in those pathways, and complete with either the chance to further their education or enter the workforce in jobs that lead to opportunities that lead to family sustaining wages. And so just some of those features include programs that we're seeing that bundle additional activities. So a student who receives something like Free City also is suggested, recommended, required to see an advisor or a counselor and build an educational plan, might be required or recommended or suggested to do some kind of a workshop related to financial literacy, financial management. Similarly, might be required to do some form of FAFSA completion before or with support in their kind of onboarding. Other programs have different kinds of eligibility requirements. Many are leaning towards expanding the eligibility to make sure that in some cases, any student can access the supports as part of the large suite of financial supports that are available for the students. There's also just kind of a side note around positioning the dollars as first dollars or last dollars, depending on where the FAFSA also comes in. In general, there are also opportunities to think about what are the other types of supportive spaces or places or people that can support a student, not only as they begin their journey, but as they continue their journey semester to semester. Thinking about ways to couple the aid with also funding non-tuition expenses. These are all those quote hidden costs. It could be obviously textbooks, but other types of specialized supplies for programs, fees that are part of certification exams, all these kinds of other costs that can derail even the best intentions of students and the best design of colleges, and also thinking about dedicated staffing that can support students in these ways. Now, these are just some of the features that we're seeing at other programs. They may or may not fit the way that City College is structured. And what we'd like to do is couple what we're seeing externally with lifting up efforts at the college that are already underway that are contributing to student success prioritization. So we want to make sure that Free City recommendations are folded in with the culture and the context of the college. So these are just some of the ways that we're trying to bring in different understandings of what's happening at the college, along with what we're seeing happening outside at similar institutions kind of working on this, so that what Gio and I can present to you in the summer is a more intentional set of suggestions and recommendations for you all to reflect on, engage with, be critical of, and hopefully use that to inform redesign opportunities that speak to the intention of Free City having the kind of impact supporting the students from specifically minoritized groups and disproportionately impacted groups that the college is also focusing on. So if you have any questions, suggestions, would like to connect, here are our contact information, our email addresses, and we'll also share this slide deck with Lisa so that she can forward this along to anyone that'd like to revisit anything that we've shared so far. So Lisa, I'll turn it back to you. Feel free to add anything to what Gio and I are sharing, and we are so excited to continue this hard but important work with you.
Thank you so much. So I think at this point, like I said, I was going to open it up for questions, and certainly thank everyone for their time and attention today. I hope that this presentation, as particularly the hard work that the RP group has already done and sort of the foundation that they've laid today, helps us to really be thoughtful about ways that we might consider. I think this is a timely conversation, particularly right before we have conversations related to how we might use Free City funding. So thank you again.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you to City College and also RP Group. I thought we'll open it up to committee members, but I thought the presentation was great and just really appreciate the focus where you all are focusing on different student populations and then also the holistic model that is really evident. So just wanted to say, yeah, thank you for that. And I'll open it up to the committee. Oh, sorry, I have to get back to my screen. Yeah, member Sue.
I think Alyssa raised her hand.
Sorry, you're first on my screen. Oh, I don't even see Alyssa.
I was going to let other folks go
Sorry.
first. So please let members Sue and Davila go first.
Oh, thank you. So Priya and Gio, thank you so much for that presentation. You've sparked a lot of excitement in me for possibilities. So that's wonderful. I do have a question in terms of best practices that you're seeing across the country. Do you see, so you examined 2 different promise projects or promise initiatives. And in my interpretation of the promise work is it's a commitment from cities for their public school students to go into post-secondary. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So we're trying to look at a variety of programs, some where the high school students are prioritized, such as Kalamazoo, such as Seattle, but also more holistically about programs that have no eligibility requirement. What we are noticing is that in either case, there are different features to the student experience from that support. So the tuition assistance factors in as one facet of the ways that the support is contributing to the ability of students to enter and stay in the programs. In many cases, we're seeing that in addition to a student receiving funds, they're also being asked to do some other things. So in Seattle, for example, in Columbus, for example, the FAFSA completion is a requirement for access to the funds. In other cases, either a student has to have a meeting with their advisor, with an advisor or counselor from the very beginning to build a comprehensive ed plan, or that a coach will be assigned throughout the student's journey. In the volume of Free City, it may be less likely to be able to do that kind of high impact, high touch support, but there might be opportunities to think about students from disproportionately impacted groups, students from equity groups that are of priority to the institution, and to think about how to prioritize more holistic supports with more intentionality for those as well. So that's kind of generally what we're seeing, and we're hopeful is that you all can bring your kind of experience and insights from what you're already also seeing to see what is possible to advance the experience of different student groups at the institution. I hope that helps answer some of your questions.
Yes, no, that's wonderful, especially with the data that you shared earlier that the students who are completing, which is wonderful. So we have a great uptick in student completion. Mm-hmm. However, the students who are completing are not our equity group. Not all of them are within the equity population. So I think this body has a lot to consider as we think about how do we use very precious city resources to support those students who are historically marginalized, both in our public school system, and I don't want to speak out of turn from the public school system, but from within the public school system and into our higher education public system. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Go, co-chair Davila, and then member Messer.
Hopefully a J Church won't run by while I'm talking. But I just wanted to say first, thank you for this report. It's very, very interesting. And I do like the ideas about the opportunities for high touch support for students to get them through. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is when you were looking at research from across the country, were there other cities like San Francisco?
So I will confess that we are still in the throes of our lit review. You got a spoiler alert and just a teaser of what we are seeing. The city-specific programs that we're seeing happen to be, as Member Sue had mentioned, focusing on bringing students in from the high schools. Mm-hmm. So in that way, there are city-based programs like in Seattle, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Columbus, which I think is a really promising program prototype. But they are all focused, I think, on high schools. So what we're trying to do is balance that. So there are a few research studies that have also been conducted about looking broadly at promise programs at large and looking at the impacts on equity related to those. So we're trying to do an approach where we're looking at programs that mimic Free City because they're city-based, but also programs that mimic Free City because of the kind of expanded nature of the students that you're supporting through looking at it by place instead of by high school.
Was Long Beach one of the cities that you looked at?
We haven't looked at Long Beach yet, but it is on our list of cities given how seminal they have been in their.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask is, you mentioned that obviously it's very helpful for students to apply for FAFSA, but what do you do about undocumented students?
That's a great question. I think that are you asking that question in terms of the requirement of it or the ways to support students who?
Both.
Okay. So
we had that problem initially with Free City, so that's why I'm following up on that.
Would you mind clarifying what the problem was before?
That everybody had to apply for financial aid first who wanted to get supported by the Free City program. And that was, those were sort of the birthing pains, I think. But it is an issue that will continue to be a challenge for us. And I'm just wondering if there's any cities that had some kind of different way of handling undocumented students.
That's a great question. And I'll confess to you that I'm not, I will add this to my list of questions to look at. I know that there are programs that are open to students who are undocumented. Mm-hmm. I don't know mechanically how they're doing that in terms of the application requirement. But I can look at that. And then I also know that there are other types of efforts underway to put together different types of supports, both educational supports and more holistic supports to be able to support students that have a variety of needs. But I can add that to my list as we look into other types of programs as well. But I know that it's not impossible. It's being done in different ways, and we can try to bring that design forward.
Okay, that would be good. I also wanted to know if you have looked at El Paso at all in Texas.
I have not, but I've actually worked with El Paso on a different.
They have an amazing program where students basically have a 4-year degree after 2 years. So it's because they've been going while they're in high school.
So there's like a combination of dual enrollment at work as well. And El Paso's been doing great work related to guided pathways for a number of years. So I can certainly add El Paso for consideration as well. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Is it me?
Go for it.
Thank you. So Priya and Gio and Dr. Cooper-Wilkins, thank you. This is great to see. And I think this program overall is understudied and under-considered in sort of looking at both in terms of what we understand about what we're doing, but also in terms of other free college programs, because thank you for acknowledging that there are some significant differences And you've mentioned a couple, and I just want to add to that list. One major difference is that full-time and part-time students are included, and especially, and that returning students are included. So that, just in terms of the overall impacts, there's a very different set, right? Where of course we're including our recent high school students, but there's no restriction on how recently you have to be through high school. There are a lot of other pieces that mean that we are capturing, City College of San Francisco has a significant number of returning students who are coming back to retrain, and so many other pieces. So that seems really important. And then, of course, it's a first dollar program. There are a lot of things that are very specific that merit studies, so that we can really look at how in fact Free City is in many cases potentially supporting more students rather than fewer, and not narrowing options. You mentioned that you mentioned looking at the recent annual report, and I wanted to make sure, speaking of literature reviews and other work, there's a whole lot of work that's been done from the inception of Free City in terms of program comparisons. That was the first thing we did in creating Free City, was look at other programs all around the country, including Kalamazoo and Long Beach and elsewhere. Those were part of the initial sort of survey of the land. And so, and then in the slightly older and much more detailed annual report, which I want to make sure that you have. And so I'll make sure that there's a link to that. It's on the DCYF website, but that also has a pretty significant literature review with comparisons and closer looks at things. And then since then, there's also this, you probably are all already aware of this, one of the sort of primary researchers is out of Kalamazoo, Michelle Miller Adams, and this book just came out last year about the path to free college, and it includes a lot of information. So I, as someone who's been working on this for a while and really doing a lot of research on it, I'm thrilled. I'm basically just an English professor, so I'm and dedicated, but I'm sort of thrilled to have professional researchers coming in to help, parse that data and work on that data. And I will be in touch to offer whatever help I can give. And I'd really like to get a better sense of where you're headed and see if I can offer some of the resources that we have from the last, 7 years of sort of putting this in, bringing this program into being, and also looking for opportunities to improve it. So thank you.
Yes, please. Gio and I would be thrilled to expand our knowledge base around this and really honor the work that has already been done instead of inventing pieces of this. So please, you're speaking our language, and we will find a way for this love connection so that we can support you in what has already been happening collectively. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention was in doing that report a couple of years back, we did the earlier iteration of the commission we did a pretty extensive survey monkey of students that has a lot of data in it. And so that's also one of the things that I've been meaning to share with Dr. Cooper Wilkins for some time now. And so there's a lot of data and information, and we'd love to be able to share that with you and have you build on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Supervisor Mark.
Thank you. Really appreciate it and excited to hear about this, the evaluation and research that Priya and Gio and the RP group are doing about Free City. And thanks so much, City College, for engaging them on this. I just had one question, about the sort of the overall frame, I guess I would say, of the research and evaluation that you're using. And it seems like if I understood right, it seems like it's more focused on equity and how, to what extent Free City is advancing the equity goals, important equity goals for City College and even our city government has as a funder of Free City. And I was just wondering if there's to what extent other lenses or considerations could be included in the overall research scope. Yeah, for example, like other goals that we have, like bolstering enrollment and retention overall in City College, just to help address the enrollment decline challenge and how that's impacting the sustainability of City College. And then also another goal that was already touched on by Maria Sue and others is around building that pathway or the pipeline, I guess, from public high schools in the city to City College, especially given that our high school student population in San Francisco is overwhelmingly, equity population.
Absolutely.
Can I just say something really quick first, Priya? And just Supervisor Mara, I just wanted to say that part of the impetus for engaging the RP group in this study was around a desire to see how we would be able to better document equity sort of impacts, because initially it didn't appear that was sort of the I guess the frame that was used when the program was sort of established. And so that's why it is seemingly a decided focus on equity. But certainly part of what I'm even hearing in some of the preliminary work that is being looked at is an opportunity for us to be able to consider, other topic areas, but it just wasn't necessarily the initial way that we engaged RP group. And then I'll let Priya talk, because I was going to say, because, in sort of establishing, this project, it did have a very decided focus on equity.
And there's also an important fundamental context around this, which is that none of this exists in a bubble. Even the support that is provided through Free City is in service of more than just helping students access the institution, but to really advance in their educational goals and complete and transition successfully into the workforce and into higher ed. So we really see Free City as a retention strategy. We see Free City as an access strategy. And we see this in a way that tries to position it in concert with other efforts at the institution that are collectively trying to make real the promise of the college, which is to ensure high quality, effective instruction for all students. And so I think, Supervisor Mar, to your point, there are other lenses and goals for this work that we're hoping these conversations can enable, not just limited, but really underscoring the equity context in this work as well. And the only other piece that I would say is part of what Gio and I are doing is also unearthing places that need more time and exploration. So for example, one of the pieces of data that are really critical to this is what programs are students who are receiving Free City going into? And how do those programs connect with the viability in terms of career or transfer into other institutions? So what Gio and I are also going to offer are points of further reflection as far as data are concerned. What Gio and I are trying to do in concert with Lisa and colleagues at City College is to advance our understanding, building on, as Member Messer was talking about, building on what you have already seen, but also to try to identify other questions related to research that are also worthy of exploration beyond the scope of the work that Gio and I are able to do in the next, in the next couple of months. But we appreciate you mentioning that, so it stays in our forefront as well. Gio, do you have anything you'd like to add?
You said those last comments are exactly what I was going to speak to. And just in closing, I would add that at least one of the outcomes I heard you describe was in relation to enrollment and retention. And thankfully, even within the data file that we're working with, we can most certainly explore that. So we can begin to explore questions like those students that participate, how many terms are they enrolling consecutively? How many terms are they enrolling overall? How many units overall are they earning? So at least at a fundamental level, some of these retention-oriented questions can be answered with the data we have access to.
Thank you.
Member Messer?
Sorry for stepping up again. I just, I appreciate all of that, and I appreciate Supervisor Marr's questions. And just wanted to sort of add, as we think about this program and what's particular about this program, is that it, it has, in some cases, a broader view of equity, and in some cases, views that are not entirely about equity. For instance, the full-time, part-time issue. And also that part of City College's mission is lifelong learning. And that's right, that's a piece of what Free City does. It's not everybody's priority, but it's certainly a priority at the college, and it's a priority for Free City. So just, it's not only about high school or transfer and completion for many of us, and we think it's a both and it's not an either or. And many of the efforts in the state and in around equity, you said it's not happening in a bubble. We are well aware of that, right? But many of those efforts begin to narrow down student possibilities in ways that I think many of us at City College want to not see narrowed. And that's been a really explicit conversation at the college and in San Francisco. So I just want to sort of lift that up again and say it's a both and, right? And Free City was conceived in a way that didn't only go down one path, and that makes it a little bit of an outlier. And we think, many of us at least, think that that's a good thing for San Francisco and for education in San Francisco. So I just want to make sure that that doesn't get lost as we have those conversations, because we are sometimes a little bit of an outlier when we have them. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for the discussion and comments and questions. Let's move on to see if there are any public comments.
Anthony, are there any speakers in the queue?
There are no speakers in the queue.
The comment item is closed.
Great. All right, on to item number 7, which is a discussion of the Free City funds. We've invited DCYF to provide us with a quick refresher on the Free City College Reserve Fund and share with us. So Maria is going to offer a few highlights from the Controller's Office presentation that was shared at our last meeting back in March. So Maria, to you.
Thank you, Chair. And actually, I just realized that Priya and Gio did a much better job at talking about this than I, so I'm going to be slightly embarrassed. But I wanted to bring back this conversation, as we had committed that we would continue to bring this back to this body so that we can have a very intentional strategy for how we use the reserve funds. So in order to prime the conversation, we wanted to make sure you hear the plans from City College regarding best practices and how other cities within the country are utilizing these types of supports and funding for college. And so I wanted, next slide, please. So as a reminder, the Free City College Fund is allocated to this work for the next 10 years. Well, we're now in year 3, so 7 more years. And it's, it started out at 15 million. It has a slight increase, and we're now, once again, going to have a base of 16.4 million, and then of course it grows with a little inflator inside it. Next slide, please. I wanted to remind everyone, once again, you've all seen this already. This was done in a presentation at the last meeting by the Controller's Office. but I wanted to remind everyone of what's actually in the reserve fund now. So currently we have $5.3 million in the reserve fund now. The way that was built was that Supervisor Kim actually allocated $2 million into the reserve fund just in case there was an increase in student enrollment. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit, and unfortunately we didn't see that increase, and we actually saw a decrease in students. And so therefore we had a $4.3 million of unspent funds in the Free City College allocation, which then got rolled into the reserve fund. And then where we are now is that we have $5.3 million in the reserve fund, because there was $1 million that was appropriated from this reserve fund to support programming for City College. What I want to share with you is that if we continue with the current enrollment patterns, we're looking at another large amount of funds that will be moved over to the reserve. And so I just want to be mindful and share with everyone that once the reserve funds hit its cap, what ends up happening is that all these funds fall back into the general fund, which is what's prompting these conversations with us. We want to make sure that while we still have a little bit more oversight or handle on the reserve fund, we want to make sure that we allocate or we suggest how to use these funds in a way that will support the efforts of Free City College. Next slide, please. So the reserve fund mechanics, once again, funds are deposited into this fund from year 1 to year 4. And then starting in year 5, there's a cap that gets created. So 50% of from year 5 to year 10, 50% unspent funds, and all funds that are not eligible in billings would get deposited into the reserve until there's a cap. And the cap is equal to 50% of the annual funding allocations. So we're looking at a cap of something close to $8 million. Withdrawals from the reserve fund can be appropriated to support Free City College programs, as outlined in the MOU, and withdrawals are subject to the authority of the mayor and to the board. Next slide, please. So we've discussed in previous conversations that there are certain parameters that we would like to see these funds be held accountable to. So we want to make sure that the reserve funds are used to support, or the funds are used to support enrollment, fees, and grants related to Free City College, and that we use the funds to make sure that programming and supports are offered to students. Any use of the reserve funds must be associated with Free City College efforts, and programs or use of funds should be fiscally sustainable. So one-time usage or short-term usage of the funds are probably the best strategies. Ongoing uses we would need to figure out a sustained funding mechanism. And programs should be properly resourced with infrastructure and supports to implement successfully. Next slide, please. So a couple of the things that has already floated up to us at the committee and in through conversations. You've already heard this desire from this committee to continue to really push the envelope around equity, making sure that these, once again, very precious dollars are used to support an equity agenda that really supports our marginalized students and moves the needle for these young people. We want to also figure out a way to bolster enrollment and retention of students at the college. We know that similar to our school districts, butts in seats translates out to resources and funds. And so how do we ensure that there are more students that enroll into the college and stay in the college? And then, of course, we want to ensure that there's financial supports that are made available to these students, because once again, if we are talking about students who have historically been marginalized in our education system, we understand and recognize that they would need additional supports in order for them to be successful at the college, which then ensures that they stay at the college to complete. We've also talked about supporting lifelong learners, and then figuring out ways to support City College students who were negatively impacted by the pandemic. And then also, of course, supports for undocumented students. I think that was this last slide. So I call your attention to those items because I think it is important for us to really be intentional about how we prioritize the usage of these funds. Right now, we are, if you think about shovel-ready projects, there are a couple of things that are floating right now. And one of which we're waiting for the RP group to share with us their findings. We've already heard about projects that are in existence, and one of which actually I was very excited to hear the RP group talking about promise projects or promise initiatives, because there is a partnership that is in existence that is between the school district and City College that last year alone was able to support 800 San Francisco public school students who are all that falls into our equity group, and help them move over to City College, which checks off a lot of those little bullet points that we talked about in terms of moving more students into the college, helping them to retain, providing wraparound supports. So I think those are the kind of projects that we want to really think about. And I ask this body to look into your sphere and really identify and think about what are some promising practices that will help us meet our equity agenda, help us bolster enrollment, help us keep our young people, keep students at the college, and then programs that provide that type of wraparound supports. So these are just conversations, and as I promised, we will continue to have these conversations as we move through this process. I'm open for questions or discussion, actually, not questions.
Member Ford, I see your hand up. Go for it.
Yes, thank you, Maria Sue, for that summary. I think it's really good and it's really helpful. I might be sounding a little bit like a broken record, because one thing I would really love to see is these outstanding fees that everybody talks about. Actually, it's my sense that helping students to pay for their outstanding fees is like one of the first things, maybe the easiest thing. I just don't know how much we're talking about. I don't know how much money we're talking about. So I asked last time, and I just will keep reminding everybody that it would just be really good to have a report of how much fees is outstanding for the Free City College students. And during the COVID time, during the existence of this free city, because if it's, whatever, if it's $1 million, we could afford it, right? If it's maybe 2 million, and just think about what that would do to students who have these sort of first nagging, fees on their list that many have said, at least to me, that they weren't even aware. We talk about free city and they really thought it was free city, and then all these fees kept mounting up. So I just want to report again and ask again that we study this, we produce a report, and then we see some of this funding and some of this money can go towards helping students be financially more solvable. That's one thing is in our toolbox that we could really help with. So thank you.
You. Chair Davila?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for that presentation. And I'm heartened that we are working on a project right now that I think will really fit in with this to get students through City College and then transferring in and providing them with a job afterwards. So it sounds perfect. I do want to also say that I like the idea of getting rid of the funds that people didn't know that they had. I think that is a big problem. Thank you, Connie Ford, for mentioning that, because it is all of a sudden it appears on your transcript and you can't register again. So I know that Chancellor was trying to figure out some kind of workaround, but I think that is a big problem.
Member Feet? I might have said your last name wrong. Correct
It's
me,
Fight.
please.
It's Fight.
Great.
Thank you. Yep. I had a couple comments / questions. One around the fees, because we, as a high school district, deal with the fees quite frequently as well, and it does block them from registering. A lot of times it might be an undocumented student or a student who is doing a international travel, like a semester abroad. And I know that, for example, so I can give you an example of numbers. I was looking it up, like pre-pandemic, it's not a lot that we end up paying the fees for our students, but I also wonder, because that's their first experience with City College and all the barriers they encounter when that's happening, when they're 17, 18, like what's their impact of wanting to continue to go there? And I know that as I've spoken to other community colleges, at least with the dual enrollment aspect of it, they have some ways to work around it, in the sense of, like, they said, one example is Skyline and Santa Barbara, I believe. They both doesn't matter what kind of student you are, if you're a dual enrollment student, they cover the fees. So they're not asking for visas, etc., things like that. The school district can provide a letter saying that they're in good standing at the school, etc. So just one thought. And then the other thing, which Maria Sue, you were talking about it in terms of last summer, which was an awesome summer. And this summer, for example, we have over 1,900 students that have applied to do a summer program, and we don't have the funds to put more than about 600 students in them. And almost all our programs are associated with a City College course. And so one of my questions is around the reserve that could be given, that might be given back. And in 2019, that was the height of our matriculation from dual enrollment students and transitional study students into City College. And we, at that year, there were of the 800 students that graduated, over 400 of them went to 800 who participated, in dual enrollment, also matriculated, over half of them matriculated into City College. And that's been a consistent decline. I mean, obviously we've been in a pandemic, so that's a huge impact on it. But I also just wonder how some of the services that we provide as dual enrollment and opportunities and experiences for the students could impact the matriculation and increase the enrollment for City College.
Thank you. Supervisor Marr?
Thank you. Actually, Director Sue, on just sharing this update about the reserve fund and sort of what the summary of our good discussions over the last few Oversight Committee meetings about parameters for use of the funds, and also just for working with the Controller's Office to provide us a clear picture of what's currently in the reserve fund and what we can expect looking ahead. I just had a question about what the projected, whether DCYF and the Controller's Office has sort of a projection of how much the reserve fund is going to grow, this year, given the continued enrollment decline at City College, and even the increased allocation that the city made. I know it looks like technically, according to MOU, we don't have to send the money back. The money doesn't go back to the general fund until next year, 23, 24, if it's over that cap. But it seems like we're going to exceed the cap already, right? Even this year, and then it seems like there are some urgent needs right now that have already been highlighted in this discussion, the financial relief for students around those extra fees that they've had to pay, and then this opportunity to support early college even this summer, to allow potentially hundreds of high school students to be able to enroll in city college classes this summer and through early college. Yeah, so I guess maybe I was wondering if you could provide a little more clarification as sort of what the projection is about the reserve fund now, and whether we can access it now to address some of these urgent priorities that have been discussed.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Supervisor, for that question. And I do know that Calvin, you might be available to answer some of these questions. But I will say that if enrollment remains the same as what it was in 1920, so enrollment stays the same as 1920, we're looking at another $4.3 million of unspent funds. And my gut tells me that it's actually going to decrease even more. But that's and so if it is just 4.3, you're already over the cap of the 8 million. And that's, that's from last year, and then we'll have this year, and then we'll have next year. So it's going to take a while for the college to bring that enrollment back up. And every year we're going to experience this unspent funds that keeps getting sent over to the reserve. And, I'm the kind of person who feels like, yes, of course we want a reserve, but there are immediate needs and there are actual strategies for us to hold and have a reserve, but at the same time work on things that can help build enrollment for the college. And so I feel like there are some things that we can really explore.
Thank you.
Professor?
I'm hoping that before I chime in, maybe we can see if any of our students or anybody else we haven't heard from, because you've heard a lot from me.
Looks like we got a hand. Yeah. Member Campos, you want to go?
Go for it. I'll go for it. I don't have any questions right now. I think the information is pretty straightforward. Just wanted to respond since Alisa did say, students, are you here? I'm here. But if I have any questions throughout the presentation, I'll ask more.
Awesome. Go for it. Oh, we got it. We got another hand. Look at that. Member Brody.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I know I've been pretty quiet, but again, there hasn't been any questions. I just want to echo what's been said about using these funds to pay for those fees. I wonder what would be the next steps and how would we go about making that possible, and obviously as soon as we can. I don't think it makes sense to turn students away who may have prior balances of fees for whatever was going on in their life beforehand, when we can help them now. So really just adding to that, that so-called vote for that. Okay.
Member Messer.
Yeah, I would also like to raise my hand for that idea, which we've been raising since the very beginning of the Free City Fund, because this is something that turns potential students away. And since we're not seeing that there's, I understand that there were some who had concerns that a lot of people were going to sign up for classes and not be serious about it, but that's not actually what we're seeing in the data. The Board of Governors fee waivers don't say, oh, you got to pay it all back. It's just like this, it's this complicated thing that becomes an additional obstacle. And fees, in fact, were already, as far as we know, an obstacle for students long before Free City under situations like these. So I think we've compounded it with Free City. And I do think that that is also an equity impact and one we haven't been able to sort of really get our, as Connie points out, really get our heads around. And I guess the other thing I wanted to say is that in my mind, Free City is specifically for students. It is financial assistance for students, which is narrow, and of course not enough to help students succeed in all the ways we need them to succeed. But it is done in this way that is about financial support and for students, and that's sort of the description of the program. And it's never been intended, in my mind, that this money would be to run programs, so to speak. Doesn't mean we shouldn't get there, but at the moment, that's not my my personal vision of what we're doing. We're trying to support students, and the college should be doing so many things and is doing some of those things to support students. But that it is really a financial aid program. And of course, we don't, nobody could have predicted the pandemic. And also there are a number of really significant policies that have contributed, in addition to the pandemic, to the inability of, to declining enrollment. And there's what's happening in San Francisco in general, and so many other pieces. So on the one hand, I appreciate this idea of shovel-ready programs, but on the other hand, that's, the shovel-ready it still costs students, students have incredibly high amounts of unmet need, and can't afford to put aside their, I have students taking my 20-hour class this semester who literally don't have more than 5 or 6 hours a week in their schedule when we schedule it out, if they only sleep 6 hours a night, and they make decisions about what classes they can or can't take, or when they have to pick up more work or not, just to survive in San Francisco. So I don't want us to lose track of the fact that even though we have fewer students, those students in many cases have greater needs, especially in the context of the pandemic. And I know DCYF has been doing some good looking at, what that means for families right now, and what the impacts are. So, and I guess the one other piece that, on the one hand, it really needs to be said, so if we're looking at dual enrollment programs and how there's need, there's need there, there's need in other places as well. So for instance, in my department, English, nearly 40% of my colleagues are just getting laid off. And that doesn't just mean that's not just to meet lowering enrollment. We are going to have overfull classes. All of our summer school classes are completely and utterly full and waitlisted. There's no more space for students to take the English classes that are what get them degrees, because I teach those classes that students need to go on to those degrees. I'm not teaching lifelong learning. The college is cutting program, and I don't know that Free City is the place to replace program that it's cutting, because we need to make sure that the college continues to support program that is needed. But I do, So there's a series of contradictions in there, and I guess I just wanted to name them, because right now we are looking at a college that is not serving a dwindling number of students, which will mean we will be having a further number of dwindling students as we cut fully enrolled classes. So if we're looking at reserves and what to do with those reserves in terms of program, I think that should also be part of the consideration, even though ultimately I think Free City is really about supporting students financially, not covering the college's program needs, whether they be summer English classes or dual enrollment.
Thank you. Co-Chair Davila. Oh, I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, trying to keep the J Church out of the microphone. I think that the shovel-ready projects might be a good idea because they are ready to go. And also, if the money can be used to alleviate the debt that students somehow found themselves in, whether it was the pandemic or whatever, sometimes it's really hard to tell whether you dropped a class or not. And I just want to speak up for that and say that, we have gone through a difficult time. We've been on a downward trend where we've lost 50% of our students since 2012. 50% of our students. So it's a really bad situation, but I think we're going to be moving forward now. And I think that these projects are a good way to start, that we can start using the money for that. Right. It seems like it's ready. There's, 200 students in the program in the high school. Joanna, you had mentioned that don't have their costs covered.
Yeah, there's about 800.
But you said 600 had the cost covered and
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
No, there's 1,900 so far that have applied. 600 have the cost covered.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. No, much larger.
That is fantastic and would increase enrollment. As soon as enrollment increases, we expand classes. So I think that's a great idea. But let's not also forget the students that were turned away because they found out that they had fees that they didn't pay, or they had costs associated with Free City, or sometimes Free City.
Great. Well, maybe I'll just round us out here and just, thank everybody for the great discussion. It sounds like we have, thinking about shovel-ready programs versus new programs versus not a program at all, but support for students, or ways to support the college and increasing enrollment. And I really have appreciated that every different idea really centers around equity. And it seems like the committee here is really in agreement that is one of our top priorities. So just to close it out, I know that DCYF has been taking notes on these ideas and comments and questions. And so what we're thinking is for the next meeting, we'll go ahead and narrow down this list and see if we can come to an agreement of a program or set of program or ideas that we can then recommend. So before I close this item entirely, I wanted to check to see if there is any public comment.
Thank you. Anthony, are there any speakers in the queue?
There are no speakers in the queue.
Item is closed.
Great. On to our last agenda item. Also wanted to just echo a huge thank you to DCYF. Again, I know it was said earlier in the meeting, but this has been so wonderful and organized, and we're continuing to work with DCYF to determine the calendar for the rest of the year for Free City College. So I know there are a few items that have been requested to come up in these meetings, such as Free City outreach and recruitment efforts, a forecast of expenditures and invoices, and then Free City student outstanding fees, and then also our annual report. I know some of that stuff was coming up in the meeting today, but we kind of have those as some pending agenda items. So for future agenda items, just so you all know and everybody knows as well, we'll plan on continuing this discussion of use of the reserve funds. And I also wanted to just open it up to see if there are any other future agenda items that you all would like to make a plug for and make sure that we get on this list of pending things. So I'll open it up if there are any ideas from the committee.
Chair,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Connie. I was going to bring up your item.
Oh, good. All right. Well, can I just ask a question about it? Who tabulates the fees? Where does that information come from? Does it come from the City College Financial Department, or does it come from DCYF? I just don't know where it comes from.
I was just going to ask Dr. Cooper.
Okay, good. Okay.
Go ahead.
So there are two different things. So I think the college itself has actually been looking at the figure you're talking about holistically for all students. And then for Free City participants in particular, we can get some of that data from our financial area. Rebecca Chavez, who could not be on the phone today, is typically someone that helps us get financial data as it relates to the Free City program. So we certainly can get that information, and perhaps it would be helpful. And I appreciate Member Ford that you've been wanting to see the data for some time, that we could break it down over semesters, because there was a period of time during COVID where there was a suspension of requiring students to repay the fees, but certainly before that, and then that also sunsetted, and so now it has gone back into effect. It would be helpful to see over time how much that fee sort of buildup is there, and like you said, and many colleges have figured out that strategy is like, how do we help forgive those fees so it opens up the possibility for students to come back and complete credentials, particularly if it's just a few units that a student has left, and maybe the amount of money that they owe in comparison to that is really so small that why would we not want to see if we can support the student in being able to finish those programs. So yeah, I will explore that with our Vice Chancellor Alameen to ensure that we can get that data so that it's available for our next meeting.
Thank you.
Any other items from committee members? Okay, great. We'll go ahead and see if there's any public comment.
Anthony, are there any speakers in the queue?
No speakers in the queue.
This item is closed.
Great. All right, well, thank you all so much. This was a wonderful discussion and a very productive meeting. Our final item on the agenda is adjournment. So to note for the record, we are adjourned at 4:47 p.m. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.